Hey, Travis,
What up, dude?
is that you out there in Georgia?
Yeah. Uh, but I guess because I went to school in the Midwest, I lost sort of the twang.
Yeah,
Although I can imitate my father at any time, because my father, as I may have said on the show before, lost his calling. He missed it because he should have been the voice of Foghorn Leghorn, one of the greatest cartoon characters ever.
he is well, we share this when we've never talked about that. He is my favorite Warner Brothers character.
Oh yeah,
Boy, I said, boy.
just such a great character. Um, I think Yosemite Sam edges Foghorn Leghorn out for me.
I don't
Yosemite
know.
Sam is I love how evil he is.
Yeah,
He's just so good.
and there ain't nothing like it right now.
That's right. Years ago when my son was little, I showed put on Cartoon Network, and they had the Warner Brothers characters, but they've totally thrown out all the adult humor, and it's just kid stuff, and it wasn't even entertaining for me.
Yeah, yeah.
So I mean, the old like 1960s version of those, I think, was just so good. That was the best.
I'll tell you one of the great moments of my life was I was in my 40s probably, and LACMA, which is LA County Museum of Art,
Mm.
did an evening with Bugs Bunny. And they took a bunch of the restored cartoons and did like 2 hours to a live movie audience. All these wealthy people at the museum in their shirt and tie and suit, all of us our age that we grew up with this stuff, and we watched 2 hours of Warner Brothers cartoons. It was just priceless, man. It was so cool.
So good. I mean, I will go on the record and say Bugs Bunny beats the crap out of Mickey Mouse. Just
Oh, there's no
so
doubt.
much. There's no comparison. He
There's
is
no doubt.
so cooler, so much cooler.
Yeah.
Warner Brothers head guy beats Disney's head guy. And I'll also say, for the record, that one of the greatest characters to just be like, as the teenage girls would say, to get the ick from is Pepe Le Pew. God, what a great character.
Yeah.
I had a friend, a colleague, and he watched hours of Pepe Le Pew and just was like, this is what sexual harassment really looks like.
They
It's so
should
good.
they should show it in classes.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
this is how not to act at work.
Yeah.
Golly, it's so good. So, well,
All right.
ladies and gentlemen, we are Travis and Ross, or Ross and Travis, however you want to word it, and we do Christ on Purpose, and we are talking about all things sort of Thomas Aquinas and Van Til and all that stuff. And so that's what we've been talking about.
So hold up the book, Travis.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm reading this.
Yes.
And I told the story last week. I tried to order it online, crummy paperback from about 40 years ago, and it was $130. And I had to sweet talk Ken Samples into letting me borrow his copy, which he never does. And I had to leave $1 million deposit, and I photocopied it, and I'm reading it. And so last week, we talked about how Norm Geisler, the author, brings up Van Til a lot in the book, and we got to talking about Van Til, and we never made the connection between why is a book about Thomas Aquinas, who lived in, born in 1275, and Van Til, who's a 20th century guy. What's the connection there? So was Aquinas a Van Tilian?
I guess it's theoretically possible that in some anachronistic sense, he held to the views of Van Til. Aquinas, of course, dies in 1274. Van Til dies in 1987. Van Til, being the father of this school of apologetics called presuppositionalism, is in a lot of ways a reaction against the methodology of Aquinas. One of the things that you have to appreciate is the fact that for multiple decades, Aquinas became less and less appreciated by Protestants, most notably those in the Lutheran and Reformed traditions. And one of the main reasons is that at the Council of Trent itself, Thomas's great Summa Theologica, also pronounced or spelled Summa Theologiae, that great work, it's the summary of theology, and it was Thomas's lifelong work that he worked on for a long time, many years, and never completed.
Yeah.
And at the Council of Trent, this is the Counter-Reformation where Rome responds to what the Protestants were saying. And so they spent multiple hours debating with one another and presenting essays and positions on justification and things like that. They basically opened up the Summa Theologica and just sort of laid it right beside the Bible as sort of the text that they were going to use to counter the Reformation. So you can imagine that Thomas's theology is going to have a bad taste in later generations of Protestants.
Sure.
Now, this, I have to say as an aside, there were multiple Protestants that were once Dominicans. Peter Martyr Vermigli would be a famous example of this. Martin Bucer, another example. They were Thomistic in their outlook, and when they converted over to Protestantism, they brought a lot of Thomas's insights into the picture and used his work as a way of building up their own Reformed theology. And I dare say that, you're not going to get a better Reformed scholastic than Francis Turretin, who's a 17th century Protestant theologian, Reformed scholastic, taught in Geneva. And his great work in theology appeals much, especially when he's talking about God, to many of the insights of Thomas. And he'll even say things like, well, the Dominicans agree with us here, meaning the Dominican tradition, the order that Thomas belonged to, who are carrying Thomas's legacy, agrees with us. But nevertheless, everything I've said notwithstanding, what you see at the Council of Trent opening up the Summa Theologica and sort of being the benchmark for countering the Reformation, and then later an encyclical letter put out by the Pope in the late 19th century, where he calls upon the church to return to Thomas as the great weapon against modernism, thereby making Thomas's philosophy not canonized in the sense that you have to be a Thomist to be a Catholic, but very close to that. So it's the unofficial philosophy of Catholicism.
Uh-huh.
Those two moments put a bad taste in people's mouth when it came to all things Thomas. So here's Cornelius Van Til writing not long after the rejuvenation of Thomism as a philosophy in the universities. And as a Reformed Christian, Cornelius Van Til is going to see Thomas is someone he has to actually do battle against. Because Van Til is not merely interested in defending what C.S. Lewis calls mere Christianity. Van Til is very much interested in defending the Reformed faith. And so for that reason, he is going to see Thomas as an opponent more than an ally.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why Geisler's a weird guy in a lot of ways, because he's going to come along. He's born in 1932, and Geisler is sort of an anti-intellectual. In fact, when he was in high school, he tells this story, which is actually kind of funny, is he never read, and he just had a really good memory. And so he passed through school barely, but he was functionally illiterate. And when his teacher said, "Did you read this book?" and he lied, and he said, "Yeah." And the teacher said, "Well, how did the book end?" He goes, "With a period." That's how
Yeah.
That's how he was sarcastic and all that. Well, then he gets saved. He converts. And next thing you know, he's finding that he has this gift of just retaining tons of information. Norman Geisler does.
Yeah.
and he goes to like the University of Detroit. I don't know fully how he got into Aquinas. Even the documentary on him didn't really explain that, but he goes to the University of Detroit and he studies under some of these Catholic philosophers. And then he will end up going to Loyola for his PhD, which is a Catholic university. So, guys, there's a weird kind of evangelical because unlike many of the guys that were big names in apologetics back in the 50s, people like Buswell, people like Van Til, people like Gordon Clark, who was also very anti-Thomistic, Geisler is imbibing this Thomistic philosophy and integrating it with evangelical theology.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like from the book that Geisler is saying that a lot of scholars have misunderstood Aquinas. Now, does that include Van Til?
I think so. And there is a debate between, I have ongoing discussions with my Van Tilian friends as to whether and to what degree he misunderstands Aquinas. Some of the Van Tilians that I know are sympathetic to a lot of what Thomas says. And what some of these guys are most sympathetic to is Thomas's doctrine of God. Forget the proofs for God. The kind of God that Thomas pushes for and articulates is something that a lot of my I don't want to say a lot. Some of my Van Tilian friends are very interested in defending. Now, there's a reason for that. A few years ago, if you see, do you see those yellow volumes there?
Yep.
That's Richard Muller's 4-volume history of Reformed dogmatics. And he talks about introduction to theology called Prolegomena. Then he talks about the doctrine of Scripture. Then he talks about the existence and essence of God, and then he talks about the Trinity. So that's what the 4 volumes cover. And the volume on the essence and existence of God, Muller demonstrates that when the Protestant Reformation broke out, they adopted the classical theism of people like Aquinas, hook, line, and sinker.
Yeah.
And you see that spill into places like the Westminster Confession of Faith, where if you look at chapter 2, where it gives you their view, the Westminster Divines, their view of God, it's straight Thomism. It's straight medieval scholasticism through and through. And therefore, in order to really appreciate and understand the view of God that the Westminster Confession embraces, you have to, if you're going to be a Presbyterian minister, which Van Til was, you're going to have to appreciate and accept and defend that view of God. Now, my response to all of that is to say, well, what better way to do it besides quoting the Bible, going to these classical proofs?
Mm-hmm.
And that's when the Van Tilian says, no. That's where we jump ship. Thomas was all about human autonomy. He was not about grace alone, yada, yada, yada.
So here's a question that I have about Van Til. I understand the presuppositional idea, the idea that the Bible is self-affirming.
Mm-hmm.
In their mind, it sounds like, though, then they exclude the rational arguments for God. Can't it be both? Can't both be true?
When you say exclude the rational arguments for God, which I think you're intending to say those classical proofs like the cosmological argument.
Yes, that's right.
Van Til would say, I'm replacing that with a better argument. And the better argument is not just that the Bible is self-attesting, but its self-attesting nature is found in the fact that it's transcendentally necessary. So that takes us back to this transcendental argument we've been talking about. That unless you presuppose the system of truth, this is one way to put the argument.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you presuppose the system of truth found in the Bible, you can't know anything. So the grand proof that God exists is without him, you can't know anything. Which God? The God of classical Christianity, the triune God who lives, who reveals himself in Scripture. That's Yeah, that's what he's going to stick with. Those arguments for God don't prove God. They're unsound. They're unsound arguments. But be of good cheer. We have a better argument that actually proves absolutely that God exists.
So you phrased it that it. Well, how did you say that? Um, I lost my train of thought. Okay, so the problem I have with that is that the classic arguments actually functionally work many times.
Well, you're preaching to the choir there, right? So I'm
Yeah,
I'm
and
going
so
to say that the classical arguments are sound as given.
well,
Yeah.
it's not just that they're sound; it's that the files at Reasons to Believe is filled with hundreds, if not thousands, of letters thanking them for the rational arguments that gave those people a foundation for their faith that they had either lost or were foundering in. And I know what I was going to say. You say that it it uh, presupposes. No, I don't know how to say it. Anyway, so I'll get to it. So it seems to me that if you have an argument that actually works to bring people to Christ, it's kind of hard to denigrate that argument.
The way I've spent a lot of time not just reading Van Til, but I may even spent more time listening and reading Greg Bahnsen, who's considered his greatest disciple by many. I think the greatest living defender of Van Tillian theology is Lane Tipton.
Okay.
And we've interviewed Lane.
Yeah, we interviewed him. Yeah,
you're a friend of mine. But historically, if people said, "Well, I want to," who's the best defender? Because Van Til is very hard to read. Geisler, when commenting on him, said the man thinks in Dutch and he writes in English, and so he is a very tough read. It's sometimes you're like, well, what is he trying to say here? So Bahnsen has been an expositor who's opened up Van Til to a lot of us. And Bahnsen would say, to the point you just made about these arguments work, he would say that would be an example of God drawing a straight line with a crooked stick. Yes, God can move souls through bad apologetics, but that doesn't mean that we should aim at doing bad apologetics.
But it brings up the question: is it bad apologetics if it consistently brings people to Christ?
It could be, because we don't judge the goodness of apologetical arguments by the results. And by the way, as a principled position, I agree with Bahnsen on this insofar as he would say, look, we can imagine a lot of people coming to Christ through a bad apologetical argument. And then after they come to Christ, someone smarter comes along, shares the critique of the argument, and now that person doesn't know what to do, because lo and behold, the apologetical arguments have been totally destroyed. And so what we need to do is, while we appreciate the fact that the Lord can draw a straight line with a crooked stick, and in one sense, that's what the Lord is always doing, because none of us are perfect apologists. We need, as a principled point, to aim at the best apologetical arguments we can, so that when a smarter philosopher comes along, they're not going to be able to flummox us, because the apologetic is just that good.
Yeah.
And Bahnsen would say the apologetical argument via this transcendental consideration is top tier. It's unassailable, and it, as Bahnsen would like to always say, it's something that you can teach to Sophia the philosopher or Sophie the washwoman. Every single person, regardless of what their training is, can master this argument and never be flummoxed again.
Yeah. I guess I feel like it's not a bad argument, like the fine-tuning argument. There's
Right.
I just don't see that there's a flaw in that argument. Some men may not believe it, but what's wrong with it as an argument?
What someone like Van Til or Bonson would say is that it's not so much that you're appealing to X, Y, or Z as a proof for God or confirmation for God's existence. It's what they would use the word autonomous. It's the autonomous manner with which you're presenting the argument. So, and this is a subtle point, but it's an important point for them.
Mm-hmm.
If I go up to a person and they say, "Prove to me that God exists," if I look at him and say, "Okay, I'm going to step out of my worldview and start where you are and grant all of your presuppositions and reason from those presuppositions to the God of the Bible," first of all, I'm sinning against God because I'm no longer making Christ the Lord of my thinking. And second of all, having now abandoned the self-attesting scripture as my greatest weapon, I'm now in the circle of the atheist with all of his presuppositions. And lo and behold, I find that I can't get to the conclusion that I want to go to.
This is what they would say.
It's bad procedure, both morally and philosophically, because ultimate presuppositions, I'm quoting his debate with R.C. Sproul, ultimate presuppositions are just that. They are ultimate. And therefore, all reasoning when it comes to our ultimate pre-commitments, our ultimate assumptions about the way the world works, all of them are circular in nature.
Mm-hmm.
And so the question now is, what kind of circle are we going to reason in? The virtuous circle is the Bible, because it gives us the preconditions for understanding the world around us. The vicious circle is any other worldview that opposes the Bible. And so what they'll do, they do step inside their opponent's circle, but they do it in an ad hominem way. And when I say ad hominem, I mean in the best sense of the word. They're attacking the person's position. I'm going to assume his assumptions to show him how his reasoning leads to absurdities. Now you step inside my circle and reasoning makes sense. So let's take a design argument. And Bonson endorsed certain design arguments. He was a big fan of J. Gresham Machen's argument when it came to ice. Isn't it interesting how when water freezes, it only freezes so much so that you can still go fishing, for example?
Yeah.
So it's an amazing fact about us that when we have just so much phenomena in our world that really seems to point to purpose, design. Now, Bonson himself never articulated the fine-tuning argument, but he would probably look at that as strong confirmation. But we need to reason about those issues on the assumption that the Bible is true, not step inside the atheist circle and try to reason to God from that argument.
I understand what you're saying. I guess I fundamentally don't get it or I just disagree. I think you can frame the argument like this. This is how I think about it. We know what. Here's how I think about it. We know what things look like that are designed by that are produced by natural processes.
Right.
We also know what things look like that are designed by a mind. They have things in place, features, items, parts that cannot be placed there by natural forces.
Mm-hmm.
The universe has many of those characteristics. There are many characteristics of the universe that, given the understanding that we have now, at least, we can say natural forces would not have, or would be very unlikely to have produced those effects.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, it's reasonable to draw the conclusion that the basic features of the universe were created by a mind that transcends the universe.
Right.
Now, what's wrong with that argument? Why do I need, is it the fact that I'm reasoning in the first place?
No.
Okay, so explain to me why a Van Tillian would have trouble with that argument.
They would go after the wording in which you gave the argument. You argued that it would be reasonable to infer, and you use words like probability and plausibility to get to the conclusion. And that's the problem. Your God only probably exists. And therefore, you're not giving God his due by saying God transcendentally necessarily, ontologically necessarily, transcendentally necessary exists. By ontologically necessary, I mean he is a factually necessary being, and transcendentally necessary means he is the precondition for knowing. So that unless I presuppose God at the outset, I can't know anything. And one of the proofs of that is that when I step out of that circle and try to reason to God, I'm going to end up with probability type arguments. There are two problems with that. First, I'm not giving the due weight to the evidence to press upon the conscience of the unbeliever, so that I'm giving him an excuse, a way out. If there's some probability that God exists, then there's also some probability that he doesn't. And if you give the unbeliever that way out, he's going to take it.
But if he's inclined to take it, he's going to take it even if you prove to him beyond a shadow of a doubt that God exists.
But the purpose of an apologetic argument from a Van Tillian perspective, and even from a classical perspective, but we'll just go with the Van Tillians, the purpose of an apologetic argument for the unbeliever qua unbeliever is to shut his mouth, not to convert. Now, obviously, the Van Tillian wants you to convert, and the Van Tillian wants God to use the argument to quicken his heart. So don't get me wrong here.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned, as an apologist, my job is to shut his mouth. And so when the unbeliever finally says, well, I guess I'm just irrational, then you step up. All the Van Tillian wants you to do at that point is he wants you to step up to the microphone and admit it. And by the way, I mean, there's a lot of that I agree with. I agree that a kind of transcendental consideration, I call, and I'm not the only one that does this, but it's a retorsive argument. You're showing that there's a performative contradiction in what you say and what you do. You're the person who says that my mind is the result of chance, and then you use it to critique,
right,
the idea that God exists. Well, that's crazy. That's cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. And so getting the unbeliever to go, yeah, I guess it is crazy. I mean, Matt Dillahunty, I watched a video of his about 6 months ago, and he virtually admits it. He was in light of this argument, a version of the argument, which I gave you last week. He basically admits, yeah, I guess I just don't really know how to get around this. I heard, and one of the debates you should listen to is Bahnsen versus Stein. This is a classic Van Tillian debate. It's only audio, so you can't watch the video of it. My students get really mad at me. I actually have them listen to the debate. And in the debate, he debates Gordon Stein, this atheist, who just shows up. He has a booklet out saying how to debate a theist and win and all that. He was not prepared for what Bahnsen threw at him. And they actually had a correspondence afterwards. They wrote these letters, and they've never been published. And Stein even said, if you publish these letters, I'll sue you. But he got Stein to admit, he apparently got Stein to admit that he couldn't even balance his own checkbook on the assumption that atheism is true.
Wow. Yeah.
And I agree. I mean, as I quoted R.C. Sproul last week saying that one of the greatest schools of thought, if not the greatest school of thought in the history of the church, was the Van Tillian school when it came to doing the internal critique of alternative systems. So the problem is that the transcendental argument doesn't so much prove that God exists. It proves that atheism is cray stupid.
It proves that all of these arguments are circular. So it's kind of a negative argument at that point, right?
That's right. And so what I think you do, and I agree with Sproul here, and this is what makes me classical. Once you do the internal critique of alternative systems, then you build your positive case. And I do not believe that Thomas Aquinas demonstrated God probably exists. I submit that he proved that God certainly exists, undeniably exists. And so it is an argument. The argument from contingency demonstrates that the God of classical theism exists. It doesn't demonstrate the Trinity. And for that reason, the Van Tilians can say any God that you prove that's short of the Trinity isn't the true God. But we've talked about that before. I just don't think that that follows at all.
Yeah. Travis, we're out of time, man.
Well, we can keep talking about this. I can talk about this all day because I love it. So,
yeah, thanks for helping me get through this Aquinas book. I'm really enjoying it. And
yeah.
We'll just keep talking about it.
Well, God bless you, brother.
You too. Love you, man. See you
Love you.
next week. Bye.
Bye-bye.